Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 32 transfer plans. We're just going to quickly recap Game Week 31, just talk about some of the team and the players and why my strategies are changing or why I'm considering some other strategies as well. Because I think it's an interesting thing about the way that I've wildcarded, where I'm a little bit more open to all chip strategies as I've tried to cover a lot of bases in terms of FA Cup outcomes, but then also in terms of actually, I guess when I look at it, whether I could free hit in 33 instead. So that's something I'll be discussing in the video. But yeah, let's get started with Game Week 31. Unfortunately, we took a step back with the red arrow again. And well, not again, but feels like again when it comes to the amount of red arrows we've had in the last probably 9-10 game weeks. And yeah, step back there. Didn't have Murphy, didn't have Livramento either. So none of the big sort of point scoring players for this game week. Munoz, I think, was pretty much matched by someone like Guardiola. Nice to get a double clean sheet as well from Newcastle. But of course, given that other people had better double Newcastle assets compared to, let's say, the likes of Trippier and Pope, there's not much to say there. Mateta did miss out on him, but did have Eze. And I feel like a lot of people have drafts where they might have Mateta, Sarr, and Munoz. So probably have lost out slightly net in terms of the Crystal Palace players. But then I've also played a goalkeeper who's gotten a clean. So doesn't feel too awful. Captaincy-wise, I guess we ended up picking one of the two better options. I was flipping between sort of Salah and Isak. Close to the deadline, I think Salah had not too many chances, neither did Isak. Palmer didn't actually even start, which was a huge and shocking decision, I think. Quite questionable from Maresca, but he's done it a couple times this season. I think the first time he did it, it was versus Southampton, and it worked out really well. It was away from home. He tried that versus Ipswich, it didn't work, and you're still looking at a Chelsea team that's trying to compete towards the top 5 here, and they're in the top 5, but I did find that quite a questionable decision, as there's a lot of teams under them as well chasing for that sort of Champions League spot. So interesting that they've sort of prioritized potentially, I guess, player fitness and this sort of Legia game as well within the Conference League. So we'll see what happens there, but hopefully Palmer should be able to start versus Ipswich at home. Just, you know, quite a surprising decision. And we saw Foden and Saka as well. I don't own these two players, but I think Saka, as expected, was not going to play in Game Week 32. I actually posted a bit of a funny tweet, which was sort of my predictions on Saka's predicted minutes before Arteta spoke at all on Saka's availability for Game Week 30. And it was something like 30 for all the Premier League games outside of the Real Madrid matches. And I think that's pretty close to nailing it. So that's why he wasn't on my wild card. But when it comes to Foden, I think Pep is a manager that's always been very much sensitive to the idea of form for players and just letting players play. But I think Foden's quite clearly in a very bad moment, so as he'd like to put it. So I think it's nice to have dodged him, but it's also not so nice to own Palmer, who's done practically nothing, right? People have had Foden auto subs that have done better. People have had Saka who scored a goal and gotten bonus points. So we're just going to have to hope Palmer does redeem himself on this Ipswich game here. As far as João Pedro, it feels absolutely brutal to own João Pedro over Evan Nilsson. That was someone that I was considering for the draft, but ultimately me going Kluivert meant that I went for João Pedro because I didn't really want to double up on Bournemouth, because I think that was probably over investing into that sort of City and Bournemouth game. And that sort of coin flip in terms of Rodgers plus Evan Nilsson versus João Pedro and Kluivert has not worked in my favor at all. As far as Nico Williams, it probably would have been better, I suppose, if I somehow found a way to play him the last 2 weeks, but I didn't. But I'm quite keen to looking forward towards a bench boost 32. And when I look at in terms of setting my team up for Game Week 32, part of the reason why I'm so confident on bench boost 32 is ultimately I've got two goalkeepers who are having doubles. Kluivert seems like he's back in the gym, so he's ready to play. Gabriel, we know he's out for the season. Nico Williams, we did pick him specifically for having such a good home game for Game Week 32, but he's also a really strong and staple pick for Game Week 36 as well, where you can see the fixtures Leicester at home. So we're going to try to target Leicester at home as much as possible. But on that theme, that's why I'm very much considering a free at 33. I'll probably actually run through the transfer plans for both the general ideas, but one thing that I find quite interesting is compared to most of the other teams, I have Kluivert over, let's say, a Rodgers. That position allows me to have an additional player in Game Week 34. And Kluivert's a very, very good player in Game Week 34, just to mention. He's got a really good home game there. As far as someone like Nico Williams, for example, I have Nico Williams over the likes of Ezri Konsa. So that's another player that I have. I think two players in general compared to the average player right now who has set up for a wild card, let's say 30, bench boost 34 or 3 at 34 strategy, where I have two more players than most people. So I will be heading towards Game Week 34 with 8 provisional starting players. And it does seem quite appealing to me right now to maybe just head towards Game Week 34 with 10 players and to use 2 free transfers then. Whereas this week, I'd potentially, well, this week I'd be using one transfer possibly, and then setting the team up a little bit better for bench boost 32, and then simply 3 hitting on 33. So that's one of the kind of key ideas that I have right now in my mind. And one of the things that I'd like to point out too is, I mean, I could also just use 2 free transfers this week. And one of those free transfers could be to actually take out a player who's got a blank in Gameweek 34. Saliba is one of those interesting players, because I suppose the question with Arsenal is, how much will they rotate? How weak will they be? They will be at home versus Brentford. They've obviously come off a great result, but they're very likely to rotate. And I suppose the idea is, do I invest completely against Arsenal on a game week like this in 32 and go strong into a free at 33 strategy? And that would be an example of, let's say, maybe dipping out of Saliba and Gabriel both, going into players like Duncan, Estupiñán, and just going all the way through with Leicester players or players that play against Leicester, and trying to enjoy the bench boost 32 from that aspect, knowing that I don't really want to have the Arsenal players anyways for Game Week 34. So that's something that's on my mind. The alternative, of course, is I just use one free transfer this week, which would be to go for something like Gabriel to Estupiñán or Gabriel to Dunk, and leave my 34 transfer to be potentially someone like Ait-Nouri, because on 34, of course, Arsenal do blank, and actually the run of fixtures that they have after 34 aren't very good. So I think there is some appeal to selling Arsenal players in general, because the next real fixture that we want them for, I would say, is 37 at home versus Newcastle, so that we can avoid the Liverpool game too, where you can close out with at least one home game and then one Southampton game for the rest of the season, which I find quite appealing. They're also most likely going to progress versus Real Madrid. So I'm a Real Madrid fan, obviously. I had to watch that brutal loss to Arsenal, which was very much deserved from the Arsenal point of view, so fair play to them. But I mean, Arsenal advancing a little bit deeper into the Champions League probably has some ramification in terms of league minutes. I do think there are some players like Kiwior, Saliba, and Marino who will probably play exceedingly and excessively good minutes for the rest of the season. So I feel like those kind of players are very, very appealing. But that's just a point to mention, right? Maybe there's an idea where if we get more risks in terms of minutes going forwards, particularly after the second Real Madrid game, who knows what the appeal of, let's say, a free at 33 would be in hindsight. So that's something I find quite interesting. Alternatively, of course, I can just go back for the 3 at 34 approach, which would probably actually just mean that I bin Gabriel off for either Kiwior or someone like Ruben Diaz, as I mentioned with my previous video. I just think that it's so unlikely that Timber is going to start in Game Week 32 here. And I equally find it quite unlikely that someone like Ben White will start both of the fixtures in Game Week 33. So that's why I don't really like White. And I think that could very much happen to Timber as well, particularly if he puts, once again, another great effort into that sort of match in Game Week 30, rather the second leg versus Real Madrid, and maybe misses out in the Ipswich match. So I do think Kiwior and Saliba for the moment are actually kind of locked into their positions. Yes, of course, someone like Calafiori can play left center back, but I think it's actually unlikely now because Kiwior has played really, really well. And Arteta's praised him, and we also haven't really seen much of Calafiori within the left center back position specifically. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but I think ultimately a defender transfer in this week, it is in the works for Gabriel, and I will actually choose between a 3 at 33 and 34 strategy. So let's just quickly jump into the actual plans for both strategies. So I'm back here with the My Team Pick and Rating tool from Fantasy Football Hub. You can find it in the link in the description below. It's the tool that I like to use to sort of manage my team, make sure that it's actually quite strong game week to game week, and just to make sure that basically I don't have any glaring holes when it comes to strategy overall as I approach the end of the season, and generally in any point of the season as well. So one thing that I want to point out, of course, is that I've put out the idea that I'm considering 3 at 33, so we'll just go through that strategy first, because I actually find it quite interesting, and I think that will diverge me against the rest of the field, but I'll also be able to, I think, accumulate a strong strategy anyways that will probably still leave me in a good position for a potential double game week 36 and a blank game week 37. So the idea for game week 32 is, as I said, to go into a Brighton player. I think if I was just to use one free transfer, it's quite appealing for me to actually go into someone like Estupiñán here versus Leicester. I think the value of, let's say, playing versus Leicester at home might be a little bit underrated right now. Maybe his minutes are also subject to sort of a bit of scrutiny, but I think Kluivert and Estupiñán can be really, really high quality picks. And so the bench boost, I think, is much stronger this week if I go for a Brighton player, as opposed to necessarily just going for Kiwior. Yes, of course, the expected value of someone like Saliba and Kiwior is quite close right now as it stands, but I do think that when you kind of factor in the rotation aspect of Arsenal, when you factor in how poor Leicester have been, and probably Estupiñán getting really, really guaranteed good minutes versus Leicester, I really do like the idea of that and making that sort of upside chase there where I bench boost on 32. So that's kind of the rough idea of the plan here. So if I make these transfers, I don't really need to care about optimizing the team. The captaincy will most certainly be on Isa. Vice captaincy will most likely be on Eze. I don't think there's much to discuss here. I would 3-hit on 33. And then coming out with 34, I would only have 2 free transfers here. So that's the kind of big thing to point out, where when I look at the team that I have now and I optimize it, I clearly have 2 players who are going to miss out as things stand. I'll probably move out of Saliba. I'll probably move out of another player as well within some of the attacking positions. It makes sense to me to actually go for Ryan Aït-Nouri because he actually has a really good game here. Common theme, we're going for defenders who actually play against Leicester at home. Do I get, let's say, Aït-Nouri versus Leicester at home, or do I get someone like maybe Dunk, for example, in Gameweek 32? I don't think there's really a right answer to that. Dunk is more of a classic set-piece threat. We know that Aït-Nouri probably has pretty good chances at bonus, but then actually, when you look at, let's say, the Brighton backline, one of the appeals of going for Dunk on a week like Gameweek 32 is actually the other 2 defenders that are expected to play in the backline in this weekend aren't actually defenders. So they've got a really good chance of getting bonus, whereas Aït-Nouri does need to do, I think, positive actions within this Leicester game to get sort of maximum bonus and things like that. So small considerations like that are in my head. The idea, of course, of having 2 free transfers is also something that's generally probably a little bit safer, I think, on that side of things. So Aït-Nouri is probably the player that I'll go for and save a transfer for. And then the other transfer that I was actually thinking about was maybe to move someone like maybe Sarr or Eze potentially out of the team. I've got quite a lot of money in the bank, and as things stand right now, I can afford a move like Sarr to Mbeumo. But I don't think it's that crazy to suggest that maybe Eze could move off. But there's a pretty good possibility that this is the kind of team that I can field out on a week like Gameweek 34, just using 2 free transfers. So because I would have free hit it on 33, I only have 2 free transfers to Gameweek 34. This is actually a really strong team in my opinion, where I actually have, 11 players that ultimately will play on this game week in 34. And as we mentioned, Mbeumo is someone who's really good to head towards the end of the season with, and just a really strong pick that I feel like, I would have loved to have in my team, but currently don't have. So that is one of the appeals of this kind of Game Week 34 strategy, where I think, as you can see, the Game Week 34 team is strong. Game Week 35 onwards, it's probably going to be a little bit weaker, but still really, really, really strong. And when we have Game Week 35, we get the opportunity to probably roll on this week and then make a decision as to Game Week 36. How hard do we want to approach, right? There's going to be teams that double. There's going to be teams that blank on 37. It might even be the case that actually we don't have doubles and we don't have blanks, and actually I don't need to care so much about this. But as you can see, I think the 3 at 33 strategy is actually quite appealing to me. In terms of the doublers, yes, of course, I lack some Aston Villa players, but that was always going to be the case given the strategy that I went with and the kind of players that I've gone for. So that's the case. I feel like the Villa double potentially in Game Week 36 is a little bit weak as well. Nico Williams has a really good singular game, chances of doubling himself. I'm still invested into a team like City. I'm still invested into a team like Palace, just not as hard as I was previously, right? Because I'm probably losing 1 Palace player without getting the full sort of understanding of what happens in double Game Week 36 anyways, when it comes to, let's say, this potential double. So this would kind of allow me to be probably a bit more flexible. Ultimately, I'm not over invested into too many teams. Of course, in Game Week 37, a lot of these players could actually blank. So it's also about what can I do with 2 free transfers at this point in time. I think that's actually something that I've considered, where once again, it's an opportunity to go against the kind of curve, I suppose, with a lot of people having really good competing teams that are all on a 3 at 34 strategy. And this is a good last chance to sort of diversify my team potentially. And with many kind of injuries and things like that, any Arsenal impacts, I might have a little bit more of a flexible kind of 3 at 33 compared to, let's say, whatever the triple up of Arsenal is that other people have. So something that I've considered is very much 3 at 33. And I know it's very subjective towards my own team because, as I said, I have Kluivert, I have Nico Williams. Not many people are in the same position. So they probably don't, I guess, grasp that it's quite logical for me to actually consider a strategy like this at this point in time. But let's quickly just refresh and reconsider what would happen if I just simply went for a 3 at 34 strategy. So if I was to go for a 3 at 34 strategy, as I mentioned previously, the idea would just be to sell Gabriel, to probably move him into either Kiwior or Ruben Dias. I kind of like going for Kiwior because I still think that the actual game for Arsenal is a bit better in terms of clean sheet odds. So I'd probably go for Kiwior at this point in time, make that transfer, go for a bench boost 32, hope that Kiwior and Saliba is going to be our backline for the weekend. It's a little bit of a weaker team, of course. As I said, I don't think Kiwior is actually better than Estupiñán this week. That's my intuition anyways. Market odds are very much supportive of, let's say, a Brighton clean sheet, and I'll just take that for face value. As far as, let's say, game week 33, the idea here is that we use 2 transfers here, right? Because I've already used a transfer this week, I'd be able to roll one of them, and I have 2 free transfers this week to probably go into 1 Aston Villa players if I can go into them, or maybe even just be a little bit more passive with this approach. Because one of the tricky things with City right now is I think it's very hard to say that the minutes for City players are very, very good. Salah is such an amazing standalone player. Kluivert is someone that I probably could keep for game week 36. So there's also some appeals to maybe just going simply for someone like Rodgers potentially if I really want to and go for that transfer, or actually just ignore that entirely and ship myself off of someone like Isak into Watkins and try and enjoy something like that as well, right? Where hopefully coming out of, let's say, this PSG set of games, Watkins is likely to play good minutes overall over that kind of double versus Newcastle and Man City. And that could actually be quite interesting, where just going Watkins is maybe just the play that I go for. I have a lot of doublers anyways as things stand, and I don't need to be too aggressive with transfers. There's obviously the opportunity to just simply go Palmer to Saka, which was always going to be my original plan, and we just need to monitor the situation with Saka. He was kicked today in this sort of Real Madrid match. I think Saka is most likely going to be a lot of our popular captaincies in terms of game week 33, so let's just see what happens with Saka, right? The alternative is always just going for someone like Mikel Merino, especially if Saka's out, right? I think it's a very simple call, easy call there. He's not on penalties necessarily, but, you know, we also have Declan Rice, I suppose, if we think he's suddenly going to be the main man on absolutely everything. But yeah, I think Saka is the most likely and obvious transfer here, and someone that I'll probably eventually captain when, let's say, it really just depends on his expected minutes outcomes. One of the interesting things, though, of course, is by locking myself into the strategy, I'm kind of forcing myself into an Arsenal attacker, potentially also into an Aston Villa forward. And I suppose if there's no Aston Villa forward of choice, let's say if I think Watkins' minutes are precarious versus Newcastle, then that kind of opens up, I think, to me at least, the idea that my Game Week 33 team could be very, very weak. So that's pretty much why, as I said, I've considered this free 33 strategy. But on paper, this is a really strong team for Game Week 33 with these 2 free transfers, provided that both Saka and Watkins can kind of come out unscathed for their second leg matches within the Champions League. And then in Game Week 34, well, you just free hit here. So the idea is on Game Week 35, is my team strong at this point in time? And I think, once again, very similar to my team on the flip side of the scenario, it's also quite strong. So nothing too much to mention. Of course, I'm a little bit more invested into an Arsenal team. And I think the big point to sort of raise is that my team on Game Week 36 could look provisionally quite bad, or it's a case that I just put all these Arsenal players on the bench and I can actually use a lot of free transfers to kind of move into double game week players. And I can still have a strong team for Game Week 37, as Arsenal do have a much better game when it comes to Game Week 37 being at least a home game versus Newcastle. So those are lots of considerations that I'm making right now. I think the 3 at 34 team is very much the meta strategy. It does feel like an opportunity for me if I really want to make, once again, big punts towards the end of the curve. Hopefully get a little bit of luck my side to go with a different strategy too, and get a lot of different expected value compared to the rest of the field, that I just go for this 3 at 33 strategy, as stupid as it sounds. So those are kind of my transfer plans. I know it's a bit unique to myself. As I said, Game Week 34 with the free hit can still be very, very logical for me. I'll just need to just continue to monitor things like minutes over, let's say, the Champions League matches. So Aston Villa still to play, just trying to monitor and get an understanding of the minutes of the players there. But I think we're very much going to see a lot of rotation for these teams in Game Week 32, specifically Aston Villa and Arsenal. And there might be some European ramifications as well for teams like Tottenham, Chelsea, and even United. Not so relevant for myself outside of Palmer, but even, let's say, his availability versus Ipswich, or even Kluivert's availability versus, let's say, West Ham, or not West Ham at home, sorry, but Fulham at home this weekend is something very much to consider for this kind of free at 33 versus 34 strategy that I have. But for now, as I said, I'm actually really keen on free at 33. And otherwise, I wish you guys a wonderful week and hope you guys enjoy some of the remaining European matches as we head towards another great weekend of Premier League football. I know it's been a bit boring recently, so I'm sure a lot of people have probably were finding the games within the weekend quite inconsequential, but I still think that the top 5 race is quite interesting. I'm hoping that, of course, my own luck turns within the season, but that's pretty much what I'm looking forward to over the rest of the weekend. And I don't know, I'm a little bit in a mode where I think I'm just going to play the rest of the season out as best as I can, taking possibly as many risks as I can as well, to try salvage the rank, hopefully secure a top 100k finish if at all possible. But if it doesn't happen, then I'm just going to have to, unfortunately hold that for this season. Very much like I enjoyed a very, very lucky season last year, I do feel like I've been a little bit unlucky this season, but there's probably lessons to learn as well, and I'll do a season review and looking forward to next season as well otherwise, because it does feel like we're in a point where I think someone actually pointed out, Rob T actually, that a lot of the XG averages for most of the Premier League teams have unfortunately dropped over the last 5 to 6 game weeks. So there's clearly been a bit of a second half of the season lull. Hopefully we end the season up on a high. Otherwise, as I said, take care. See you guys next week.